guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
Welcome back to the Clubmobile, everybody. We're so happy to have you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Joining us today, we're so excited. Joining us today is Mel Bloom, founder of the 350 Girls.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
We're so happy.
So I've been following you guys for, I guess, a year now, and it's always incredible seeing the different topics you're bringing to the show.
I think you were one of our first followers when we started about a year ago. We're just about at the year mark. Well, I guess by the time this comes out, we'll have been at the year mark.
We'll have passed it,
but yes, December 11th. But I think you were one of the first that followed us, and I immediately got good vibes from you.
Well, I appreciate it, because good vibes seems to be a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
I saw what you guys were doing, and I'm like, I thought, there's not enough like telling these stories of World War II, but especially women's stories. So when I saw what you guys are doing, I'm like, this needs to be put out there and encouraged, because it's just, especially, with World War II, it just seems like it gets so dominated by like Band of Brothers and, like the same like 5 or 6 stories. So
yeah, absolutely.
No shade to Band of Brothers.
No, we love Band of Brothers.
We love Band of Brothers here.
But yeah, it's definitely, when you start telling people World War II, their first question is like, oh, have you seen Band of Brothers? And it's like, well, yes, I have. And if it's not Band of Brothers, it's Saving Private Ryan. So one of the two.
Which I have not seen, by the way, which is very terrible of me. I have never seen Saving Private Ryan.
I can't believe you just openly admitted that while we're recording.
I know.
We're going to have to fix that.
We will.
I promise I will fix it. I've been avoiding it for 10 years because I know it's really sad and I don't want to do that to myself at any point. But I know I need to watch it. I know it's one of those.
You definitely do. My favorite question is, well, what do you like better, Band of Brothers or the Pacific? And I'm like, don't make me pick.
It's like picking a favorite
between
child.
The 3 of them now. It's like asking you to pick a favorite child, and I'm like, don't make me pick. I love them all for different reasons.
And they all tell very different stories.
They do, yeah.
I know people tend to default to seeing my favorite is like the Pacific, because I do a lot of Marine Corps stuff, but it's like they're both really important stories. And then you have Masters of the Air, which is really cool because then that opens the door talking about the women who were stationed with the Women's Army Corps in England. So I'm like, please don't make me pick. I will talk your ear off about all 3 equally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For those who don't know, what is your mission and the mission of the 350 Girls?
Yeah, so we actually originally started as a World War II women's history group. It's kind of a public history project, and we're coming up on our 3rd birthday was in October, and we've actually ended up expanding into the post-war years, and then even as far back as like World War I and some of the Spanish-American War. And our mission is to make sure that the women's stories are told correctly, because a lot of times it's just like a soundbite on, birthday message or a Facebook post here or there. So I started 350 Girls to make sure our stories were not just being told, but being told correctly. And I also wanted to make it accessible, because with how hard it is to find our stories, not everyone's going to be able to go dig through the National Archive or take a trip down to like Sweetwater, Texas. So I wanted to create a platform and to bring these stories where people could find them, where they could access them. And that kind of evolved into us doing things like table displays and living history. So that way we can bring these stories to museums and organizations that might not otherwise get to hear about these amazing women. So it's kind of an evolving mission in that we keep learning new ways and new opportunities to serve and represent. But at the heart of it all, it comes down to keeping these stories alive and accurate and accessible for everyone.
Which I think is a shared mission between the 3 of us sitting here.
Absolutely.
Keeping them alive. I want to ask, why 350? Because I went and I was like, I think she's from Massachusetts. Is it a zip code? Is it an area code? But I Googled if 350 was a zip code, and it was like, no, it's a California zip code. I was like, oh, or area code. So why 350?
Yeah, so it's actually for the 350,000 women who served in World War II. So when we started as a World War II group, we wanted to find a good name that represented the 350,000, which does include the 1,000 women of the WASP. It includes the Navy and Army nurses now. Mm-hmm. And that is the official number from the World War II Museum, is that 350,000 women served in World War II. And even as we started reaching other eras, I like keeping it as 350 girls, because then we're paying tribute to this, original group of women that set the tone and set the precedent for everything that was going to come after. So, and then girls came from, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the slander campaign, but there was a lot of negative press about the women in World War II, the kind of, women they were.
Yeah.
And one thing that kept coming up was things like Little Lady and Petticoat Army. And I kept seeing like, these girls think they're soldiers, or these girls think. So I found in their letters and in interviews that they started referring to themselves as girls. They kind of took that and took ownership of it. So we came up with 350 girls to represent, the number, and then a nickname they kind of took on for themselves. And it's, we sat on the name for about 6 months before I actually launched it, because I was like, I want to make sure this sounds good and it's, going to be an appropriate representation. But even with, as like I said, we expand, I wanted to pay tribute to that original 350.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you obviously went along with the history of the name itself. And I feel like everyone calling them girls was such an infantilization of these women. Yeah. They never labeled them women because they saw them as lesser than themselves.
Yes. Skirted soldiers,
Yeah. The fact that they took ownership of it and they made it their own little joke, and the fact that you've carried it on is really cool.
I appreciate it. I hope, I hope we make them proud, but it's like, it's amazing what they put up with. And when we were looking at like names, it was like, we found every variation of insult. And we were like, we want to make sure we find something that's actually what they approved of, and not something that we think sounds cool, but back then was considered kind of inappropriate. And I think, Petticoat Army was a second choice, but
that would have also been very cute. I really like that.
But that one, it was harder to tell if they actually liked it or not.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If you ever start a podcast, you could call it the Petticoat Army.
I could, because that one actually goes back to the Civil War. So
that's really
that opens some doors.
Do you find that now that you're telling more stories than just World War II centric stories, do you find that the themes differ between wars, or do you find a specific theme because women have never been treated as they should have been treated?
It's actually kind of amazing, because I started looking into what women were doing all the way back. It's like the Revolutionary War, because we're in Massachusetts, so it's been all things 250th. And it was really interesting because I started looking into George Washington had a system for nurses. Like there was a pay scale, there's hierarchy, no uniform, but there was still like a set organization for the nurses. And then I was comparing it to what the Red Cross was doing in the Spanish-American War with their nurses, and then up to, the modern day nurse system. And it all actually tracks, and everything that we've done as women in the military kind of builds. So that's why we actually started expanding into other eras, because it was like, I can't tell the story of World War II and talk about context without being like, hey, actually, this goes back to like George Washington, or this goes back to, the Spanish-American War, World War One. And there are those themes where it's like everything that has been done before is still so present in how we still serve in the military today as women.
Yeah.
But we stand on the shoulders of everyone who came before us.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Was it learning things like this that made you enlist? Was this a thing that you always knew and loved and then enlisted off the back of that? Or did you enlist completely independently and learn all this later on?
It's kind of funny that I actually had no idea about any of this when I joined.
Really?
I joined for a few different reasons. I mean, I grew up in the aftermath of 9/11, so that was a big piece of my enlistment. But 350 Girls really has our roots in my basic training story, and that when we were going through our Air Force Heritage Manual, it was like, the Wright brothers, which gotta love the Wright brothers. Their sister is actually very involved in aviation, but she doesn't get told as part of that story. But the Doolittle Raiders, Hap Arnold, all these like really essential characters in Air Force history. And then there's Chief Master Sergeant Grace Peterson, and there's just a little blurb in there that she was part of the Women's Air Force, and that was it. And from there, it was like, well, what's the Women's Air Force? Why are we not being taught about it? And it just kind of spiraled from there. So I actually did not know a whole lot of this when I joined up. And then when I was noticing there was all these like kind of moments where women's history was kind of briefly mention, and then we move on to something else. And I was stationed in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which is middle of nowhere. So I had time to do the research and really get into it. But I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I was just kind of interested in it. I just wanted to know for my own curiosity. And I didn't really expect it to kind of turn into this. And here I am 10 years later.
You jumped into a rabbit hole that it kind of spiraled very
and
on
it
brand
keeps
for
spiraling.
Gabby and I too. Yeah.
What is it that Kara says? You pull on a thread and then all of a sudden the whole spool like unravels and you have all this information in front of you.
Well, that's kind of how our Rev War research started. I started that thinking, I'm going to find, I'm curious what was going on here in New England during Patriots Day during World War II. And I had found something about a Bostonian nurse that was taken POW in the Pacific, and they celebrated Patriots Day in the POW camp. And then I started like going even further back and like, how has Patriots Day been recognized? And next thing I know, I'm researching like George Washington and the nurses. And I'm like, well, there's no unknowing that. That's going to have to come into an episode.
So. You kind of feel like there's an episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia where he's got multiple pins and strings on a map and he's frantically
I always say that's us, right?
That's us. Yeah, it's always you begin one thing and it bleeds into another thing, and then you find something else is related to something else, and then you find out the whole time that their name has been spelt wrong in records. So then that starts a whole other pylon of research.
We figured out that Tatty Spatz from the Red Cross her name was spelled Catherine with an A, like
Catherine,
not Catherine with the E. And once you drop that E and put the A in there is everything you could imagine on her. And I remember you called me one night. You were like, "We've been spelling her name wrong." I said, "What do you mean? We've been spelling her name wrong. How?" So there's only one way to spell Kath, two ways, K or C. That's how you spell Catherine. And she goes, no, drop the E, put an A. And I was like, oh my God, there was everything. And then I remember finding the entire catalog of Life magazine photos that Bob Landry took at the 96th bomb group in 44, February 44. The whole thing. I said, oh my God.
I don't think like there's even like a good way to describe like what that moment feels like when you just
that feeling something is so great.
Like especially with women, like if you figure out their maiden name and all of a sudden you're finding like the hometown reports about them joining, and it's like I've actually woken up my boyfriend in the middle of the night when I find things, but it's just like it feels like you found them, for lack of a better word. It's like you're bringing they're no longer forgotten, and it's just so exciting to be like, oh my gosh, I get to share this, and I get to tell people about you and your story and what you did. And it's like, it's definitely a justifiable cause for waking someone up at 3 a.m.
I completely agree. I have been known to do the same thing, and it's usually me waking Gabby out of a stone cold sleep.
Or I wake up to 12 messages in the morning and it's like, I found this, and this. And I'm like, okay.
Mel, do you have a favorite subject you like to teach others about in terms of World War II women's history? Do you have a specific favorite person or just a subject overall?
I think it's always so hard for me to pick a favorite person because that changes weekly. But I think for me, what I really am passionate about is really emphasizing the military nature of what they were doing. And I think that's a big piece of what gets lost as part of their story, is that people tend to forget that they were enlisted, they took risks, they were signing military contracts and volunteering for dangers unknown. And when I'm out there and I'm talking to people about, like, for example, the 6888 last year, or the women working in the motor pools in Hawaii, people are like, well, but they weren't really soldiers, or they weren't really, they were just sorting some mail, or they were just fixing Jeeps. And it's, I think probably my favorite thing to talk about is like, no, these are military women, these are military veterans, and they should be discussed and recognized as members of the military. And a lot of times people just kind of forget that.
That's a sentence that I hate. Well, they just did this. Okay. Well, I can, you could look at a member of the Air Force, let's just say, and say, well, he just flew a plane. Well, he was just the navigator. He wasn't the pilot, he was just the navigator. That's not, you would never catch anybody saying that about
About a man.
a male member of the military.
Well, and it was
Why do
interesting because
why do we say it about the women? It bothers me so much.
and it happens all the time. Like in the aftermath of the 688 last year, we kept seeing comments where people are like, "Oh, Tyler Perry's making us think they were really veterans," or they weren't. All these things being like, this is being passed off as a military movie or a war movie, and it's just a feel good holiday movie. And I feel like I spent 3 months after the movie came out just talking to people constantly, being like, "This is a military movie. Those are military women. Those are veterans. They just they." And it just kind of amazed me how many people genuinely did not think they were military. And that was the part that shocked me, was how prevalent that opinion is. So when I'm at an event and people look at me and they're like, well, you're just doing this, or, talking to the guys and not giving me the time of day, it's like, I have a military story to share with you as well. And it's important that you hear it because it's not what you're used to hearing. But I have to convince people just to even understand that this is a military story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a woman veteran yourself, do you still feel that the same treatment is still prevalent today in our modern times?
I think it's really easy for people to discredit what women do. And it's kind of going back to that Rev War story that I was looking at and realizing just how critical all of those roles were that women were fulfilling. They tend to be the most, invisible, but we're looking at things like nursing, cooking, laundry, things that any army, any military needs to be successful. You can't just win on combat and strength alone.
Yeah.
So when they're discrediting, women's service because, oh, they just work in finance, oh, they're just PR, oh, they're just a dental assistant. It's like, well, I'd like to see the Army function without laundry, payroll, clean clothes, and hot food.
Right.
And not saying that, it's interesting because that does carry all through American history, where it's like we're discrediting women simply based on the fact that they are not combat mission, but then we completely underestimate just how critical their services are for a successful fight.
What did you do in the military? What was your rank and what was your job?
So I am a one-term, so I did my one enlistment and got out, and I was a base records manager. So I have one of those jobs that people look at and go, well, that doesn't really count. Right. And, what's the worst you can do? You can give me a paper cut. And actually I can put you to sleep with presentation. I'm very good at that. But
exactly.
Those are very lethal. Anyone who sat there training briefing is going to be like, yep, those things are deadly. But when I'm talking to women veterans, it's important for me to be like, look, and on paper, I was a secretary. I did one enlistment. I never deployed. And if I'm out here telling my story, there's no reason you shouldn't be. And if I can stand up and say, hey, my service counted and I did everything that people say discounts my service. But if I can tell you that I'm a veteran, so can you. And that was important to me. It was recognizing that when I describe, because I'm completely guilty of not owning my veteran status. Like, it's taken me almost 7 or 8 years to fully own that I am a veteran. But I was realizing that with what I do with 350, for me to be like, hey, you're a veteran, but I'm not. It's one, hypocritical, and two, it doesn't make it easier for other people to be like, well, why is she ashamed?
Right. Yeah.
So it's uncomfortable, and I recognize that going back to World War II, we get women who are like, oh, you don't want my story, I just did this. And
I only flew a plane. I only
set the precedent.
Right. I only did this, and I only left my family home and trained for weeks and weeks to be able to serve my country, even though it wasn't actually recognized for 30 something years, which is that still makes me so angry that these women were ignored for so long. And it hasn't changed. I still feel like women veterans of our time are ignored based upon the fact that they're not holding combat positions, or they're not holding combat positions, or they're just not at home serving a man. I feel like all this progress we make and then we just take we
divert right back.
It's been such a hard year for that, and it's tough because women, when we think about the definition of combat, And there have been women who have been serving in combat roles and that kind of discrediting that we're seeing. It's like, okay, well, if a woman was near the front lines, like the Hello Girls in World War One or the nurses, we're like, well, that technically counts as being on the front lines. You've got nurses with all these like battle awards that they earn for their service. We've got the nurses that were landing on Iwo Jima. And when women are in combat, it's frustrating how quickly that conversation turns to, well, here's why it doesn't count. Like, okay, maybe they weren't Iwo Jima, but it's not like they had a rifle. And it's like, no, they just stabilized a bunch of men, landed in, risk getting shot, and triaged them and got them, up the survival rate. Right. But yeah, no, that doesn't count as combat. And it's like, it's really frustrating how often we have to deal with kind of unpacking that legend and telling people like, this is still important. This still matters. And it feels like people jump through all these hoops to justify why their point of view on why it doesn't count. And one thing that we find a lot is that when people do want to talk about women's World War II service is that they're comfortable with certain roles. Like they have no problem if grandma was like a nurse or a Rosie, that's a cute ladylike, they were with the Red Cross. And you're talking, you start talking about like, well, they were doing this, they were like, involved with motor pool or something less ladylike or something that may have been more directly involved in combat, and they shut it down. Right. It's like grandma could be a nurse, grandma could be, even a WASP pilot. That's kind of cool now. But there are certain roles that people still are like, we don't want to think about women being involved in that.
Right. Like even like women code breakers in the waves. And it's like, you say, oh, she was a code breaker. And they go, oh.
Yeah. There's always
women were holding so many STEM roles. Like women in the Navy and in the Army were helping build those bomb computers in the middle of nowhere, Dayton, Ohio. And it's been really tough. I mean, over the recent years, we started seeing more people acknowledging that women were involved in those projects. But a lot of times in the past, before that book came out about the Code Girls, when you did find information on the code breakers, the women were never mentioned. They wanted to acknowledge their invention and what they had created, but not give them credit for actually the work they did.
Yeah. It's even like the Calutron girls in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It's they managed the uranium for the atomic bomb, and they didn't even know what they were really managing. But who got credit for the atomic bomb? Not the men. The men did, not the women. But why did they bring in the women? And she said too, she goes, it's because the men couldn't keep their mouths shut. They couldn't stop talking about it. The men couldn't trust a man to not keep a secret.
Colonel Streeter of the Marine Corps actually wrote a really interesting memo after towards the end of the war. She very clearly felt women were going to be utilized again. And she came up with a classification of jobs that she was like, women can do this, as good as the men or better. Women are just as good as the men. This is the male only role. But there was a couple of jobs she was just like, women should only be allowed to do X, Y, and Z because they're precise, they're detail oriented, they don't get flustered. And it was interesting seeing her notes where she's looking at this being like, there are some jobs where it was known that women excelled in this role and may have actually done better than the men and should be considered for this. Right. But she did acknowledge, maybe there are some things women just won't be able to do. But they were having those conversations. I think Eisenhower even made a note like, oh, women were better at like certain things than others. And it's just that's kind of gone away in the last 80 years that they were recognized for that.
They held down so much during the war as well. Even those that stayed at home and did take care of the children, they were still then made the head of the household. Yeah, they still had to go out and get a job. They still had to then control everything that their husband had controlled, and they'd found this newfound independence. And I think the thing that makes me the maddest about the whole thing is that the second the men came home, it was given straight back to the men. It wasn't a case of, oh, now we can share things. Now you can go out and earn money, and I also can. The jobs were instantly given back to the men who had just come home from war, who were incredibly traumatized. A lot of them had lost limbs and lost every friend they could think of. There's a bit at the end of a WASP newsreel where these women are boarding a plane to go to their first base. And at the end, the narrator says, maybe one day after you've helped your husband put his feet up, you can tell him that you used to fly a plane. So they just discounted every single thing that these women did.
And they were Army trained too. They were Army Air Force trained women.
Yeah.
The real irony of it, and I found these newspapers a couple of months ago looking for something else, is that they disbanded the WASP on the whole idea that, well, you're taking jobs from the menfolk now. And then post-war, there was actually a major pilot shortage in the Army Air Force. And they were just like, where'd all of our skilled pilots go? And it's like, well, you sent them home to raise children. Like, you can't complain about this, but it was in the newspapers, like, where'd all the pilots go? Why can't the AAF recruit enough pilots? And it was like,
you sent them home.
You have over 1,000 pilots. Yeah. Use them.
And I do feel like I'm not talking shit or anything. I do feel like Jackie Cochran had such a big part in that disbandment because she was still very much of the patriarchal belief that a woman's place was in the kitchen. Yet she was not herself.
She wasn't a girl's girl. I think that's the best way to put it. She wasn't a girl's girl. She did by leaps and bounds open up doors for these women, but then she was this, like, the same person that opened the door was the same person that closed it.
Yeah.
And I can never really get fully on board with her.
Yeah, me either.
I feel like that's one of those myths that we deal with all the time. And I think there's actually a Jacqueline Cochran documentary coming out. And I feel like she's one of the most polarizing characters. And we talk about how, she was all for women, but she still was very specific about who she was including and how she did not, there was no, you had to be white to be a WASP, and you had to be in makeup, and you still had to, know the right people. And yet she's really the figurehead that's emerged, and Nancy Harkness Love just kind of disappears into the background. And even in basic training or anywhere around the Air Force, we're a lot more likely to hear about Jacqueline Cochran well before we hear about any of the other women involved. And they always kind of gloss over the things that Jacqueline Cochran did, where it was like they weren't going to make her a major and they weren't going to put her in charge. So she was like, well, if I can't be in charge, then nobody gets to do this. And it's tough because people are so defensive of her, and it's like, I'm not, like you said, I'm not shit talking her. I'm not, putting her down. She did a lot for women in aviation, but she also did a lot of harm. So when we talk about like context and, it was 350, it's like, we want to tell the entire picture. But the problem with talking about women is that as soon as you start talking about things that may not be flattering or might go against what people know, they get so defensive and just shut it down. And it's like, they were still human. We can't put anybody on a pedestal. We need to be talking about the entire picture that was like Jacqueline Cochran and the WASP and how all that went down. And people just don't want to hear it because it's uncomfortable, because we've been kind of taught that Jacqueline Cochran was like this aviation hero for women.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to
accusatory.
It's a tough topic, but it has to be said.
Yeah, of course. I feel like there's no discredit of, like, she did have a tough life. She had a very tough upbringing. And did she really bring herself out of the ashes? Absolutely. Like, no discredit to that at all. She really did. But I think her involvement with the WASP, her creation of the WASP, kind of pushing Nancy off to the side, was very selfish.
She was definitely not a girl's girl, is a good
No, she wasn't.
Like, she was about promoting herself. And she was very successful in that endeavor, and a lot of women benefited from what she wanted to do. But as soon as it stopped benefiting her, we see her basically turn off her advocacy, and that kind of continues through the 50s and 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially because
sort of like
I feel like
of a tantrum.
She did. She joined the ATA. She went over to join the ATA, and as soon as she was grounded, which I didn't know this until recently, she was grounded from flying because she had like sinus issues, and she couldn't, the altitude would cause her like severe nosebleeds. As soon as she was grounded, then she became almost like the glad hander, the host. And she did that until she heard about Nancy. And as soon as she heard about Nancy, she dropped the ATA and hot-footed back to the States and was like, well, in Hap Arnold's face, what about me? What about you? He gave you, right? He gave you this entire thing to manage the American women in the ATA, but it wasn't enough.
Still wasn't good enough.
Had to come back. Had to take more almost. And that's, she opened a lot, like I said, she opened a lot of doors, but she closed the same doors that she opened. And I think that that's something I will never fully be on board with.
It's such a tough conversation around, some of these, one of the other conversations we have a lot is the conversation around race. And one of the things that we have to acknowledge with the work we're doing is that this was a tremendous opportunity for women but at the same time, we're looking at the recruiting standards of something like the Marines or the Navy, and you can tell that's going to really be aimed at like, college educated, middle class white women. Right. And the Marines didn't allow women of color to serve until 1949. And the WAYS is 1944. So we do have, the Women's Army Corps, which is amazing, but a lot of times I have to remind people that this was still, the 1940s, and it was still very much the politics of that era. The Army wasn't desegregated until 48. And I know it's tough for people to hear like, well, maybe this was discriminatory and it may not have been an equal opportunity. But it's another one of those hard conversations we just can't shy away from, because everyone deserves to understand how that comes back to our context argument, is that we need to talk about this big picture and understand that this was important and it was a big opportunity. But if you weren't, in certain criteria, the odds of you, because I've met women, they were like, oh, they wanted to join the Navy, but they didn't have a college education, or they weren't from the right neighborhood, and they joined the Women's Army Corps. So there were these incredible opportunities, but there was still very much those, issues of the 40s where class and race could define how you could contribute. And people get very defensive about that, but it's like, I can't change the history. It's just my job to make sure that people understand what was going on in that time. It's not like with World War II, where everyone just kind of remembers like the big band and the swing and everyone came together for blackout drills. There are still major social issues that were continuing throughout the 40s. So it's a tough conversation.
That's a major thing that I find today with history, is that people get very upset if they don't like something that happened in history. And it's like, well, it happened. It happened, right? You can't change it. So the best we can do is educate ourselves and each other on what happened, and either try not to do it again or move forward, right? Take the reins, take control. But I feel like you're right. There's tough conversations, and people don't want to acknowledge that there were certain inadequacies in history, but that's history, and that's why they call it history.
People don't like it when things aren't sugar-coated.
Yes, they don't like it when things aren't sugar-coated.
People don't like it when you turn, not when you turn it into the truth, but when the truth is told. And World War II wasn't just, like Mel just said, it wasn't all big band and joining together in a blackout shelter and having a little dance and a drink.
Right. It wasn't all USO dances and handsome men in uniform. It was gnarly. That's really the best that's the best word to use. I think it was gnarly.
It's interesting because some of our biggest critics and people, it's interesting because I deal with people that, are totally on board the idea of 350, and they kind of love what we're doing. They think it's great we're showing up and doing reenactments and sharing this history. But then as soon as I start talking about some of the more military aspects of what they faced, women dealing with trauma, women coming back, women being taken POW, and people almost get like angry that I'm talking about World War II and women's roles in it in a military context, which is how it should be. But they're like, well, you're ruining my perspective of, like the donut dollies and the Red Cross nurses and all these like cute little ways that women contributed. Like, they want to think about women's service in such a specific way that when I have these conversations where I'm like, no, they experienced this, they were dealing with that, they were, they were doing drill, they were in parades, they learned how to use weaponry. It's like, I'm sorry to burst your bubble on what you want to think about women in the 1940s. And I'm sorry you just want me to be a photo op or a pinup girl or some kind of like nose art. But I have an obligation to share the history as it happened. I mean, you start going through the primary sources and the records. Women weren't technically supposed to keep journals, but a lot of them did write letters. Hearing about the actual hardships that they experienced, and they were homesick. A lot of them were away from home for the first time. They were experiencing things that, were completely new to them. And it's like people get frustrated when I want to share what they struggle with, because it's going to undermine their credibility. Like, well, if you show that they struggled, people are going to think women couldn't handle it. And I'm like, the men were homesick too. The men were allowed to be, traumatized and stressed and struggle to adjust. But if I start talking about women doing it, well, you're showing that women couldn't handle it. And that's not the case. Just because they were scared and homesick doesn't mean they didn't show up, and they did.
Yeah. They had a name for it for the men. It was combat fatigue, right? Combat failure, combat fatigue. For the women, and I remember reading this in one of our Red Cross books, it was that the women, the one rule for the Red Cross for the donut dollies was never let the men see you cry, because you're not supposed to.
not supposed to cry.
You're
meant
supposed to
be the
hold them you're
shoulder.
supposed to hold them together. But then
Yeah.
I'm sitting there reading it and I'm like, well, who's holding them together?
Yeah.
These
Yeah,
are girls that are
themselves.
now landed on, they've, been serving RAF bases. A lot of them have now landed on Omaha Beach post D-Day and are following the convoy of the army through the front lines. Who's holding these poor girls together?
And then they came home and it was almost worse. And
Yeah.
they never
Yeah.
got to deal with it. I mean, the guys could go, down to the VFW or the Legion
Yep.
Hall, have a beer and be like, I can't believe we experienced this. And the women were just expected to go home and just not talk about it.
Yeah.
And we
Exactly.
have somebody in our one of our reenacting groups that we work with. She does Red Cross in the Pacific. And whereas if you were stationed somewhere in the European continent, you could move around, you could leave the combat zone behind. But if you're at a Red Cross station in New Caledonia, it's not like you can go on leave and pop up to London for a weekend. You're there.
Exactly.
You're
there
there.
for the foreseeable.
Yeah, a lot of them needed escorts to leave or
Yeah.
to go from their station back to their quarters. They needed a male escort with a weapon.
And that does not get talked about.
No.
It's like
Absolutely not.
they came home from the war having seen a lot of what the men were seeing and expect to just be okay. And
Yeah.
the Army and Navy nurses didn't even get VA benefits for a while. So where were they going to get that kind of support? And if they did get it, the stigma, and again, being afraid of being like, oh, well, we couldn't handle it. And there's that really weird double standard where it's like, you can see the horrors of war and you're not even supposed to be there. And yet you're the weaker sex. And yet you're the one that's supposed to be totally okay.
Yeah.
Processing that on your own.
Yeah, you're weaker, but I need you to hold me together.
Yeah.
It's an
Absolutely.
incredible double standard.
It is. It's a
It
terrible
actually leads
double standard.
it leads into a question that I wanted to ask, where I wanted to ask if these women were essentially dropped from military life right after, whereas the men were supported, the women were not. Do you feel that is still happening today to women veterans? Do you feel like the support of the modern world is still less so for women than it is
As a
for
veteran
male
yourself,
veterans?
especially.
Yeah.
It's still really hard to get support as a woman. I mean, there is absolutely no reason I can't walk into the local Legion or the local VFW and sit down at the bar. But depending on where you are, there's a good chance you're going to get told, like, you don't belong here. And if you've read the book The Women by Kristen Hanna, she talks about how when women came back from Vietnam, they'd walk into the VA and people would be like, there was no women in that situation. And a lot of times people still think that, women can't have trauma because in modern times, we kind of affiliate trauma with deployments and combat. And even though there's several other ways you can experience trauma, a lot of people, both male and female actually, but especially female, struggle with being like, well, my trauma doesn't count, or worrying about sharing their stories. So if there are, in theory, resources and communities for women to go, there's still such a fear that they're going to be rejected. And it keeps women from walking in the door, which is one of the more unusual things that actually I'm proud to say we can do with 350 is we actually got asked to do a veteran resource fair about a year and a half ago. And I'm like, this is, connecting people to Medicare and VA benefit. Like, what the heck do you want us to do? And they're like, we're going to sit you between the American Legion and the VA sign up booth, because they're losing women. Women are not coming to these tables because they're so afraid of walking up to them. So like, we need you to sit there with your history display and show women that their service counts, so that way we can get them enrolled at the VA. And things like that are why we're not just specifically a history project. We're kind of somewhere between a reenactment group and a VSO at this point. Yeah. But, and people are like, how does your history, how does sharing history, what's the impact of what you do? We were able to help women understand, you deserve to go walk over to that VA table and get signed up. You deserve these benefits. Here's the women who fought for you to get these benefits. Go get what you deserve. And that was probably one of the more meaningful events we've done, but it also really signified to me, it's like, we need to know this history to support our veterans, which sounds like kind of a strange argument to make, but not knowing our history, providers don't take care of our women veterans because they don't know. A lot of people don't understand when they walk into a Legion hall that they deserve to be there. So I think that's probably my favorite part about what we do with 350 is we can use history to help women veterans get accepted.
Again,
So it
it's
does
still
scare me
a
through.
it's still a she just did this or she just did that. Like
There's
that
that sentence
hasn't
again.
changed.
How do
Yeah.
you have PTSD from sorting mail? How do you have PTSD from, how do you have head trauma? How are your knees going now? Like, how is your service? And we make women justify and prove things in a way that like a man just comes in and goes, yeah, I've got trauma, and everyone goes, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Women still have to prove it in a way, and it's tough.
In an embarrassing way, I've realized too, is that they have to make fools of themselves to be heard, especially by medical personnel. They have to make themselves look like the damsel in distress in order to receive the help that they rightfully deserve. Um, and I think that's diabolical. I think that's horrible.
What's tough about where we are in New England is, I'm sure the name Edith Norris Rogers, she's the reason we have the Women's Army Corps.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently working with the Women's Caucus here in Massachusetts about figuring out why we're losing women veterans. And they'd asked me to come and share what I knew about women and the VA system. And I had found that there was actually women involved in like the soldiers' homes and women getting Purple Hearts. Like World War I veterans were actually eligible for VA care going back to like the 1920s. And the VA wasn't actually founded until 1933. So I've had people be like, well, maybe they're just not used to women in the system because the system wasn't built with women in mind. But then I went and did the research and I'm like, well, there was women in soldiers' homes. And the Bedford VA was one of two hospitals that was actually designed for the World War II women veterans. There's two. There was one in Washington State and the other one's here in Bedford. And they were both designed to incorporate women veterans. So whenever I go to the Bedford VA and I'm like getting rejected as a woman at this VA, I'm like, this is almost worse because I know you were designed to treat women veterans. Right. So there's really no excuse, but it's like getting rejected for care at the Edith Norris Rogers VA is always a little bit extra special. It's like, that's not what she wanted. She specifically wanted women veterans to be taken care of, and that's gone completely lost. She was thinking about it. She was a World War I Red Cross nurse, and she was like, we got to take care of our women veterans, and fought for that, and we just kind of lost it.
It's been kind of kicked out from under women that rightfully deserve it, and it's horrible. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. It is.
And especially since like I said, we have been involved in the VA since the VA started. So anytime they're just like, well, the VA wasn't meant for women, it's like, actually, that's wrong.
Yeah.
It was meant for women.
It was designed.
Mm-hmm. It's just more proof that they would never and possibly will never take a woman veteran seriously, because in a post-war world, they never counted them as veterans, like you said. Yeah. They never. And then a lot of these women were not officially militarized until 30, 40 years after their service. So a lot of them weren't buried with military honors. A lot of them weren't given the flag. A lot of them weren't, like, their children weren't given the money that they rightfully deserved from the VA either. So many things have like snowballed from it being designed for women, and then the men coming in and sort of snatching that away.
Yeah.
Until the women themselves fought for it.
One thing I learned recently is, we've all heard about, women's Air Force service pilots getting their veteran benefits in 1977. Mm-hmm. And I just learned recently that the Hello Girls got their veteran benefits at the same time. And that's not a story I've heard. So
wow.
It was, so when they signed that GI Bill and signed that veteran status, it was interesting because not only were the Hello Girls getting their recognition in the 70s, the women's Air Force service pilots, that was the same era where the women's Air Force. So when we do Vietnam events now, it's our opportunity to talk about this massive culture of change that was happening for women in the 70s. The WASP and the Hello Girls were getting their veteran status. Women were being allowed into service academies. Women were being allowed into different roles. And it's like the secondary wave of change for women that kind of parallels the 40s. But nobody was talking about the 1970s when I started doing this. And that's one of the newer eras we started researching and looking into. But looking into that and realizing just how much was changing for women in that era, and realizing how few people know about that, like a lot of this combat stuff, they're like, well, women can't fly. And it's like they were authorized in the 40s and then authorized again in the 70s. and it's just not talked about. We know about the WASP, we don't know about the 70s.
Right. And even in the 70s, they said these are the first women to ever fly
Yeah.
with the US Air Force. And the women from the WASP stood up and said, wait a second, you are not the first women. You are not the first women. We were the first women.
It's
And
like
it's amazing how quickly, it really just amazes me how quickly America went from praising these girls to then, as soon as militarization was on the table in 44 or late 44, yeah, early 44, because they were disbanded in late 44. As soon as militarization was on the table, the entire country turned their back on them.
Yeah. And the press was scathing. They went from praising all of these women.
And Jackie Cochran said to them, don't say anything.
Yeah, keep your mouth shut.
Keep your mouth shut. Be a lady, keep your mouth shut.
One of the issues I take, and I love the 688 movie for a lot of reasons. I think it was a really important film. But one of the injustices I think about the film is that at the end of the movie, there's that really heartwarming scene where they get applause and recognized and thanked for their service. And whenever we've done screenings, I have, gotten up and been like, great, happy ending. But the reality is that was not what happened. And I'm not really comfortable with them rewriting history and being like, oh, we did recognize these women. We did give them credit back in the 40s. I want people to know that it wasn't until like the late 90s, early 2000s where the 6888 really started to get noticed. And I was so uncomfortable with them being like rewriting history and being like, yeah, we did recognize ladies. We did give them credit. And it's like, I don't want people to think, oh yeah, they got credit when they didn't. That to me was a revision I just was not comfortable with. And as with any war movie, there's creative liberties, and I've been very polite about the uniforms in the film, but that was just such a big revision that it just didn't sit right with me.
Right.
Yeah, we felt very similarly about it. We felt we were very happy that the story was being told. We were very happy the movie was made. But when we watched it, and I believe we watched it twice, so once was just to understand the whole thing, and the second time was to take notes and have a basis for an episode. We agreed that we didn't really like it because it felt too Hollywood romancy as opposed to accurate war history.
I remember watching it and saying, well, why? I mean, I understand why you're telling a love story. You've got to kind of brand it somehow. It's going on Netflix.
Yeah, you've got to
But why are we putting the entire emphasis on the love story? And yes, okay, it ties back to the importance of the male. No male, no morale. But I immediately watched the documentary afterwards.
Yes.
And that was where I really sat there. I could not take my eyes off the screen. I really sat there and was like, this was what I wanted.
Yes.
This is what I wanted. I didn't want a whole love story. I wanted the history of the 6888. I wanted the history of Charity Adams. Where was the history of her in this movie? They put the spotlight on her in the trailer, and then
it wasn't about her.
It wasn't about her
at all.
Really, at all. She has her moment at the end where she tells the general, over my dead body. And then, they get the applause, right? She has her big moment, and then they get the applause, and it's like that. She had her moment in real life, but there was no applause afterwards. So
no.
And I feel like that kind of highlights what I was saying earlier about there's a certain expectation, like the whole manufactured bombing raid and the explosion. And it's like, if it's going to be a war movie, nobody wants to see a war movie of them actually like freezing their butts off in a warehouse. But the reality is that's most people's war experience. It's not going to be, I think the most recent number I found was like 1 in 5 will actually serve, like 1 in 5 soldiers are actually in a combat role, and the rest are slugging it out in a freezing cold warehouse, sorting mail, doing all this, not so glam. And it would have been kind of cool. I mean, it wouldn't have made a very good movie, unfortunately, for Hollywood standards, but I think it could have been really important to show their service as it happened. It was not glamorous. It was not necessarily, a bombing raid and love stories, but that's the reality of wars. It's not actually that glamorous or exciting or dramatic.
Yeah. It had a lot of potential.
It was so important they did that because, I mean, the thing that is tough about the Pacific is we get Lena's story, and it kind of gets, again, love story. We kind of hear about her in the context of John Bassel, and I love that. Yeah. But it's like you went through all this effort of researching the WR and getting the women out there, and it's like we could have expanded on why women were in the Marines. It's just kind of an accepted fact in that universe. And it's like this guy's coming back from the Pacific, And while he's been away, they've introduced women into the Marine Corps, and he's just like, okay, cool.
And where's the
Yeah,
first place
he
we
just-
see her in the show as well? We see her in the kitchen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think the uniform they're wearing is actually a WAC uniform, because I've seen photos of WRs in the kitchen and they're wearing like the coveralls, which we do
Yeah.
see later, but they put her in like this little cute white outfit.
Mhm.
You know, it's very,
They did.
and yes, you know, I mean, yes, that was her job, but it was interesting because it was like, that was again, that kind of picture of here's what's acceptable for women. You know, you can be the
Right.
love interest, you can be in a little outfit, and you can be in the kitchen.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the only things I wish I could have seen more in, is like, what was her story?
Yeah.
You know, she had a storyline of her own, because her service was remarkable.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Hollywood does tell these stories because, and it's important, but it's like, it still has to be within those parameters I mentioned, where it has to be kind of palatable and cute and soft and socially acceptable.
And not as gory as the rest of the Pacific was. There has to be some kind of softness somewhere.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking about it, Gabby. I believe Jacqueline sent us a picture of John and Lena when Lena's in that big baggy coverall uniform.
Yeah, I think she did. I have to look for it.
They stood outside a hut together, and he's got his arm around her and she's like smiling so big. So yeah, there is a picture of her in that big baggy coverall thing. It's adorable.
I mean, the WRs had the best uniforms, but it was still military uniform, and it was still World War II with, you know, all the supply chain issues that go with it. And they didn't know how to dress women. So it's like they had some things that were really well done. But I always love wearing like my coveralls or my fatigue uniform for when I'm doing the motor pool work. And people are like,
comfy.
they would not have looked like that, would they? And I'm like, oh, yes, they did. They look like
Yeah.
this a lot more than we want to admit.
It's like when the WASP were starting their training and they were like, well, we have nothing for you but these leftover men's
Zoot suits.
Zoot
flight
suits.
suits. So here, have these and, you know, do what you can with it. Make it
Roll them
fit.
up.
Roll them up,
Yeah.
cinch the waist, make it fit. And these curls are so petite and the sleeves are hanging off of their arms. And it's like, and then they said, well, all right, well, get in a plane. Go ahead, go fly.
Yeah, go do that.
Roll your sleeves up and go fly.
One of the things I love about doing the living history is when I get to kind of experience some of those like issues. So I'm putting together the general's uniform now, which is the WASP uniform, which is like the men's khaki pants, the leather jacket and the white button down. And instead of trying to find khaki pants that fit me, I was like, I'm going to get a pair of men's pants that, you know, for the Army Air Force, and get them tailored and see how it goes. And I brought him to the tailor that I trust with the uniforms here. And he's pinning and looking, and he's like, is this supposed to look good? And I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, well, it's not. It's going to fit weird. It's going to get, this is not meant for you. And I'm like, I've been trying to kind of recreate that experience. Like, what was it like for them getting these uniform issues and trying to make it look good? And he's like, it's not going to look good. And I'm like, I know, it's just, that's how it was. And I'm actually really happy I had that experience. But I'm like thinking about what it must have been like, and being handed this uniform and being like, here you go.
Right.
We got to
This
make
is the
this
best we
look
can
good in
do
front
for
of
you.
Yeah.
It's not a good uniform. It is not a good look.
Do you have any that are your favorite and your least favorite? Which one is sensory overload? Get this off me before I rip it off myself.
I
Do you have like a nice one?
Yeah, I hate the Army uniforms. And I mean, I feel like I'm about to get like hated on, but it is the most itchy and ill-fitting. And I represent an officer, which means that I get to kind of get away some private purchase items, or I could get nicer quality. But that wool shirt for the Army that buttons up here and then you've got a tie, like you come out at the end of the day and you've just got like your whole neck is strong.
Oh.
And it just, you don't feel good. And it's always interesting for me whenever my Air Force uniform is terrible. Everyone who's in the air, like, it's not a good look. And it was interesting because, you know, then I wear like even like a 1950s Air Force uniform or a Marine uniform, and you stand a little taller and you're like, this looks good. I feel good. You know, I look like I'm actually representing, you know, my service. And you wear something like the WAC uniform and you're just like, I just want to go hide in a corner.
Yeah.
I do not want to be
Don't look at
seen.
me.
And that was, you know, that was by design. You know, they didn't want to have a fancy uniform because they didn't want the women to be seen as like clothes, you know, obsessed with fashion, because they didn't want them to get that frivolous little girls, little ladies mentality. So that called hobby was like, I want them as close to the men's uniforms as possible, colors, materials. I don't want them to look good. I don't care if they look good. So it's really interesting when I do something like Marines, which is designed to look good and designed to make you feel classy and designed to like recruit. And then I put on the WAC uniform and it's like itchy and ill-fitting and just not comfortable and not even a functional uniform. You know, it's like, how the heck am I supposed to do my job in this?
In this. Yeah.
So it's interesting seeing the two approaches where it's like, this is going to be a recruiting uniform and this is going to be, you know, draw no attention to yourself. But the Women's Army Corps came first. So I think they kind of figured all that out. And the Marines were like, the WAC is having a hard time with their uniforms.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love wearing any of the Marine uniforms, but the Navy uniforms are definitely a close second.
Yeah.
I'm
All
on
of
the
them look
hunt.
amazing.
I'm on the hunt
Yeah.
for like anything that could resemble like a donut dollies, the jumpsuit, the blue pants with the cropped jacket.
Yeah.
I've
got nowhere to put it in
I've
my
got nowhere
apartment.
to
I've
put it
got
either, but maybe I
nowhere
would
to
like
stick
sleep
it.
in it, wear it to bed. I don't know. I have nowhere to put it,
Lay
but
it
I want
nicely
one.
in the closet.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, we do have a storage facility, but whenever we're gearing up for an event, I have a closet in my bedroom and I won't pretend that's not the reenacting closet. And all of my clothes are in the front closet. So
We'd have to
when
do
we're
the
pulling
same.
things,
Functionality. That's
I mean,
functionality.
as much as I want to say I have never bought books I don't have space for, or uniform items we don't have space for, it's like I'm gonna get it and make space for it. That's just
Yeah,
the
Get it
rule.
and
we
make
do.
space.
We'll
Exactly.
just-
I'm always like, I'll get it and I'll figure out what to do with it later.
I'll figure out which way it goes.
Yeah.
After that.
I know a couple of folks who are getting ready to do like it, and I think it's so important seeing them at events because I know there's like some people that get kind of territorial and being like, oh, I need to be the only one doing X, Y, and Z or whatever. Like, I don't want other people to be representing this. But I think it's so powerful, like when I'm at a reenactment and there's, you know, multiple women running around doing like donut dollies or Red Cross in the European theater versus Pacific theater.
Right.
We've got, and, you know, even if you're doing Women's Army Corps, if I'm doing motor pool and they're doing, you know, like code breaking, I think it's so important for the public to see that there's, you know, because a lot of times you just get kind of like a one perspective, like, okay, yes, this is a donut dolly, but she's in the European theater. What's that look like in another country or another state?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's so incredible when people come out with these different stories because there's so many different ways that even if you're in the same branch, you're going to be doing something totally different.
Right.
Yeah,
Not everybody did the same thing. It wasn't static.
Yeah.
So it's
Which I
always
think-
amazing seeing that diversity and representation.
Yeah.
Right.
What is next for you and the 350 girls?
So we're starting to slow down for the year, which is, it's kind of surreal. We're in December already. Like it was, you know, we've got
Right.
Pearl Harbor Day coming up. We've got Wreaths Across America, which is one of my favorite events. And I feel like those are the kinds of events that people forget. There's
Yes.
equally as important as like 4th of July or reenactments. So we're doing Wreaths Across America Day, and then we're slowing down until March, which is Women's History Month. But my goal for 2026, because we just announced our theme for 2026 is serving on all fronts. So we are starting to look ahead to 2026 events and reaching out to museums and being like, hey, we've got lectures on this topic. We've got displays on this topic. Is there somewhere we can set up and can we be a part of your event? So my goal is for just to keep building on the momentum from this year. Because even with everything that could have gone sideways this year, we've lost funding, we lost venues with all this, like, you know, can't be diversity topics. We still had a phenomenal year. We had 3 or 4 public events every month for going on 8 months in a row.
Wow.
And I'm really proud of that because it shows me that no matter how many different ways we've had people try and shut down what we're doing, there's still a need for these stories. And especially like with the 6888 Masters of the Air, and women are in the headlines. And that's not going away. The only thing that's going away is people's ability to find answers. So my goal for 2026 is that even with all these websites being deleted and museums being shut down or losing funding, I'm really hoping that in 2026, we can keep that trajectory and keep helping people hear this history. And I'm really looking forward to, you know, these conversations and these opportunities we have. So I think it's probably why I was so calm with everything that was going on this year. It's like, I still know that I get to help. And I have an opportunity to keep these stories alive, no matter how hard they're trying to either rewrite them or change them.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the best way to look at it. Nobody can stop you from sharing your knowledge, right? They could take away websites and funding, like you said, but nobody can actually silence you. which
we're,
is important. And we need to remember that the only people that can silence us are ourselves. So our job is to keep talking about it, keep it at the forefront.
We've been getting
absolutely.
throttled on social media. Like we used to get 5,000 views on our TikTok, and now we're down to like a couple hundred views. And it's, there's things that I recognize, like we're going to be hampered by some of these algorithms. And I recognize that we're probably not going to be, it's probably not coming up on Google. So that's why I've been taking us offline as much as possible. Like last year, we were a lot more like, hey, we're going to put this on social media. And this year, I'm like, I'm getting out in front of people as much as I can, because I can't really count on social media to help us share this story. But if we start showing up at events, if we start showing up in more veteran events, we can help other people hear this and hope. And one of the questions I get asked is like, what happens if you show up to an event with like 5 people? That's 5 people who didn't know the story an hour ago. Exactly. So for me, it's just keeping it going. And that's my big hope for the upcoming year and moving forward. But I thought 350 was going to shutter after 6 months. I figured when I launched this, it was like, is there really that much interest in this story? And I'm finding that as we grow and as we evolve, like when we hosted a 688 screening here, I figured we'd get like 1 or 2 people. And we wound up having to basically franchise it with other local organizations that had 5 locations across Massachusetts to seat everybody. So I think that there is more interest for this. People just don't know how. So when we go out to the community and we go out and reach people, there is that interest. They just didn't know how to access it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I feel like we felt the same about the podcast. We were like, we did 1 episode, we did 2 episodes. We're like, where's this going? Doing? Are we going to get what we like? Are we going to get are people going to get out of it what we want them to get out of it?
Yeah.
And now,
are people going to care?
Are people going to care about it as much as we care about it? Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's amazing to see that, yes, people do care about it. There's certain episodes that come out that, people jump at it. It's like, Scott Gibson, Matt Leach from Band of Brothers, like, they claw at it because it's the Pacific, it's Band of Brothers, and it's men. Sorry, guys.
And there's others that we've done that we feel
we're so proud of it. We're so proud of them. We're like, this episode came out so great. The editing is great. The topic is great. And I watch the numbers on it and I go, well, it's women, and it's a strictly, it's not about a show. It's not about a movie. It's strictly the history of women or a group of women, and people don't know how to digest it. That's what I think. They just don't know how.
When I first started doing this, there was a couple of times where I get phone calls where they're like, hey, we want you to do a speech, but we're afraid you're going to like isolate people. So can you mention like the guys as well? Can you include? And I'm like, no, they're not, they're not including me in their lecture. They're not talking about my history in their lectures. But there was that very real fear that like, if I don't include this, and I'm fully aware that if we're trying to get like views on something, if we slap the Band of Brothers theme song in the back of the video, it's going to go a lot more viral, a lot more quickly. But there's just that you have to be so comfortable with acknowledging that there's going to be videos that like just bomb, or that people are going to be like, or people are going to start a fight. I love when people try and start a fight with me, and it's like, so
that's fun.
But for me, it's like 100%. It's like, I'm just going to keep putting it out there, and it's going to find its target audience. And it's so tough. And especially because social media likes to send me emails being like, if you spend $100, we're going to get you, 3,000 more views. And it's all about like upselling views. But I'm like, I'm not here about views. I'm trying to reach a specific audience. And if there's 5 people in that audience, okay, even if Facebook messages me every day and being like, hey, you're failing at social media. Because we get those emails from TikTok like, hey, you could do a little better with your views. And I'm like, but that's not what we're about. And it's kind of a tough platform to try and utilize. So, but yes, Facebook is basically,
I get those from Facebook where it's like, if you verified your account, you could be budgeting X amount of dollars a day. And I'm like,
no, thank you.
That's not what we're here for. Like, we're not really, this isn't a money making, like, this isn't a cash grab for anybody.
We get pressure to monetize. We've been asked if we have a Patreon. Like we do, that's probably the big thing for 2026 is figuring out our funding model to keep 350 sustainable and moving forward. But one of the things that bothers me so much is when I see women's history up for sale. Someone's like, oh, hey, I've got the uniform standards, but I'm going to hide it behind a paywall, or, I'm not going to give this information. And the way I see it, it's not up to me to make money off of this. It's not my place. It's not my history for sale. And when I see people putting this history up for sale or hiding it or limiting who can access it, it is my biggest pet peeve because we owe it to these women who served to make their history accessible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, is it good for certain things? Patreon? Yeah. Like, does it help you kind of keep the cost at bay to do certain things? Absolutely. I mean, it's like everything. It's got its pros, it's got its cons, but
Exactly.
to put the history itself behind a paywall, absolutely not.
And
Absolutely not.
I mean, there's some places that's interesting. The World War II Museum. I don't know if you've ever tried like using their photography. They have so many amazing photos of the women in World War II, and they charge you like $500 for a download of an image. Like
This is the one in New Orleans.
So
I was just down there last. When was no,
it's an amazing museum. And
it took
so
me
much
it took us
information.
2 days to go through it. Yeah, but it was so incredible. And I said, "Do you have a display on the women?" And he said, "We had a display." He goes, "We had it. It was the temporary exhibit." He goes, "And now it's moved on to Atlanta." So he's like, "It's the exhibit exists." He's like, "You just have to go to Atlanta to see it."
I got to see it in New
You
Orleans.
did?
It was incredible. I was there when it opened, but it was
amazing.
I think that to me says so much about how, because when people are like, why isn't there a just permanent display somewhere on women in World War II? I mean, the Women's Memorial in DC does have the women, but when people were asking me, why isn't there a permanent display somewhere? It's like, well, if the World War II Museum doesn't even have a permanent display on women's stories, and they're using that same travel model, it says so much about how important that story is, that they are also trying to get it out into the community. Exactly. But when a museum like the World War II Museum doesn't even have a permanent display on women in service, how can we ask the same with any small local museum or any other museum where it's like, this story is important, and there is mention of the women in the military throughout the museum.
They're interspersed very nicely, I will say.
It is included. It's not like it's stuck on a women's corner, which is another kind of pet peeve where it's like they're just kind of separated from the context. So it is really, really nicely done in how they do include it, but they could expand on it.
And I think they could,
they could. And it was interesting because even they were like, we have a hard time finding the stories. We have a hard time finding the interpretive materials. We can't find the uniforms. But a lot of things do stem from like what the World War II Museum is doing in terms. And one of the big things they're very involved in is Rosie the Riveter. Like their bar is named for Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah, I loved that little bar. It was adorable. I had to ask the waitress. I was like, "Do you mind if I like walk around and take pictures?" I was like, "I'm not just trying to take pictures for the sake of it, but like, can I take pictures?"
People do look at the World War II Museum in terms of like setting the tone for how we talk about service. And the World War II Museum, like a lot of other organizations, are very heavy on like nurses and Rosie the Riveter. And that's awesome. I'm glad they're doing that. But it's like when people are like, well, why aren't your locals, it's like, well, look at what the precedent that's coming out of the World War II Museum is.
Yeah.
They set the tone for how we talk about service and how that trickles down to smaller museums. So I tend to bug them every now and then to remind them they need to share more stories.
Yeah,
I agree.
Well, and there's no women. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox, but there's also no women in the video. If you go to like their theater, the Tom Hanks video, they don't mention a woman in the military at all.
They don't.
Wait a second, because I saw that show, Beyond All Boundaries. I went and saw that.
There's a wave walking on the bottom at the screen at the very end.
At the end, yes.
That's it.
That's it.
So the bigger organizations really need to understand that what they do sets the tone.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
It's a great movie, but where's the women?
Yeah,
you think they were never involved in
it's a great film. I came out of it crying.
I did too.
Came out of it crying, and my dad looked at me and went, "Are you okay?" I was like,
"No, no, I'm not okay."
I promise I'm good. But no, I was very pleasantly surprised to see all the uniforms in each, like it wasn't just like, here's the women, but like her nurse's uniform was next to the the private uniform who was playing baseball, and his baseball glove and his bat, and then there was her, and there was a story of kind of like how they were connected, that they were in the same RF base or something. And it was nice to see how they interspersed them and connected them to the men.
and
But
put
at the
them in the
same-
context of the theater they've served in.
exactly,
Because you
exactly.
do get the women's corner, which can be kind of problematic in its own way.
Yeah.
Which there was a display outside of one of the cafes. It was like it was a 688 display, and it was mailboxes, and it was a big, like it was a tall spiraling, like looked like just a piece of art, and it had all letters, and it was just this spot for the 6888, and I was like,
Mm.
this is cool, but why isn't it in the display? Why isn't it in the walk through of the European theater? Why is it sitting outside of where I just had lunch?
Yeah, why is it just kind of placed there?
We run into that event sometimes where people try and stick us in like the women's corner or the home front. And I'm really excited because we've got an event coming up next year where one of the things I really wanted to emphasize, and I got the green light to do it, is we are doing an American theater setup, because that kind of overlap between the home front and the American theater gets
Yeah.
lost. So we're actually getting the green light to designate the American theater as part of this event. So that way we're not dealing with that question of like, well, women, can't obviously be fit into this gallery, but it's still a military display in a military context. And I'm really excited because we're going to get to represent even like men's impressions, like training displays, men that were back here working and doing certain stateside roles. So it's like kind of a hidden piece of history that kind of gets lost to the home front. But then we have a place for the WASP reenactors to sit that isn't like next to, the Victory Garden.
Right.
And we love the Victory Gardens. We love our home front reenactors, but it's a very different situation from where they were
Yeah,
served.
absolutely it is. Yeah.
And Paris Island Museum also does that. They incorporate the women throughout the galleries, which is really well done. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I didn't realize how it's been almost an hour and a half at this point.
Has it? I didn't even, I
We've
wasn't
had
even,
so much fun. No.
I did not look at the clock. This has been great.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I really appreciate it.
No, we had a blast. I feel like it's finally so nice to meet you after being
Yes.
Instagram friends for
Likewise.
a year
long,
and a year and
yeah.
change. This has been such a treat, and I really hope that we can maybe hook up at some point and either do something together, like do an event together, or come see you at an event. I know you're not too far from me. You're up in Boston. I'm down in New York, and
I'm going to be recruiting
we
you.
came very close to seeing each other in May. I remember I was up at the rifle event, and you were like, "Oh, are you here?"
Oh,
I was
wait.
like, "Yes, but I'm kind of stuck in the ballroom for the event all day."
Yeah.
I'm going to be recruiting you guys for an event one way, and that's the other thing is like, I really want to try and promote more women's organizations, and I know it gets competitive, and I just don't do that. So if there's anything I can do to
be competitive, yeah,
we're on the same mission. So if there's anything I can do to support, but you guys are going to be getting invited to events, and I'm not good at taking no for an answer. So
Good.
we're gonna.
That's great because no is
we're-
not a word that's in my vocabulary.
Yeah,
so.
we're not very good at that.
You'll be getting recruited. So
Wonderful. We can't wait.
Good.
Can't wait.
well, thank you so much,
Exciting.
and enjoy
Thank
the
you
rest
so
of your
much.
weekend.
Thank you,
Of course,
guys.
you
Thank you
too.
so much for tuning in and listening, and we will catch you next time.
See you
Bye,
next
everyone.
time. Bye, everyone.